Have fun.
Thank you. You got the cool part wrong. So let me tell you why, because I'm a CPA. So I think that's all I need to say. But the unusual part, you definitely got that right. So this is kind of what I'm going to try and talk about. There's so many habits that I tracked in my study. I tried to button it down to 15 of the habits that I believe were the most transformative in taking ordinary individuals just like us and anybody on the street and transforming them into self-made millionaires. Let's see. So before I embark on the whole study and what it's all about, I want to just give you a little bit of background. So I'm a CPA. I'm also a certified financial planner. I have a master's in tax. I spend most of my life in tax. I would say large corporate tax, and the last 12 years in small business and individual taxation. And I was born and raised on Staten Island. And when we were very wealthy early on, my father and my mother was probably worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million in today's dollars back then. And what happened is my dad's partner, he was the sales guy. He was the genius, the sales genius. My dad owned a tool and die distributorship. He had Woolworths, Sears, you name it. He had all the big companies, all the distributors, all the retailers, on the East Coast. And he was the brains behind the operation, the administrative brains, and his partner, who was younger than him, was the sales genius. And boy, my dad said he was amazing. He died of a heart attack at age 39. So my father was smart enough, and he said, I can't run the business without him, so I'm going to sell the business. So he sold the business. He got $4.5 million for it back in those days. And they had to make 3 payments. One payment they made, the first payment they made, which was like $1.7 million, and then about 8 months went by and they were supposed to make the second payment. They didn't make the second payment. They didn't make the third payment either, so pursuant to the terms of the agreement, the company reverted back to my dad. It turns out my dad was too smart for his own good. So he gets this company back about 18 months later, and mysteriously within 30 days, it burns to the ground. There was no mystery. We know what happened. They burned it to the ground, but we could never prove it. And he lost almost $3 million worth of inventory overnight. He said, well, not a problem. I've got $3 million. I'll just go and buy new inventory. What he found out, though, when he started calling up the vendors, the manufacturers, was that the new owners did things a little bit differently. My dad had always paid for his inventory COD, cash on delivery. They went 30 days to 60 days credit. So $3 million worth of inventory was unpaid for. And my dad, many of these individuals had gone to parties at our house, weddings, baptism. My dad was friends with them, is what I'm trying to say. They were good. They were part of his family. So he decided, he made a fateful decision. He wrote out checks for $3 million to pay off all the vendors. And then he decided to pursue the insurance companies to get the money back. So he called his insurance agent, and his insurance agent said, Bill, I haven't been your company's insurance agent for the last 2 years. They dropped us when you stopped being the owner. So then he called the new insurance company, and that's when the fun began. For 18 months, my dad fought them. He went through about $500,000 in legal fees. Back then, imagine how much that is now. It's probably $2 million nowadays, right? He thought he would be able to get back somewhere close to $4 million, $3 million for inventory and $1 million for other stuff. Well, they kept fighting him and they kept fighting him. And he was down to really no money. And he was in Brooklyn court. And he knew the judge because my dad was the Democratic leader on Staten Island. He was, besides running a business and being successful, he managed campaigns for Abe Beam, for the mayor, the borough president of Staten Island, for Congressman Murphy for 7 terms. He was quite an individual. So he knew the judge, and the judge said to him, "Bill, there's nothing we can do. They just filed all of this new paperwork. You're going to have to get your attorneys to respond to this, but you will win, but you're going to have to get them to respond to this." And he told the judge, "I can't. I don't have any more money." So my dad left the court, and it was just on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge. So I have a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge there. And he started walking over the Brooklyn Bridge because he had no money. He had to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge about 4 miles to the Staten Island ferry to catch the ferry, and then he was going to get a ride from somebody at Borough Hall who he knew. Halfway through his journey, and he told me this, I guess when he was in his early 80s, we were having a couple of cocktails at his house in Colts Neck, and I asked him about all of this, and he gave me some information, background, and this story is the one that really broke my heart. And he said, "I never told this to anybody, but when I was walking over the Brooklyn Bridge, I stopped, and I considered committing suicide." He said, "I don't know what happened, but I got into a zone. And all I could, my focus was so narrowed, all I could think of is, how do you physically get to the end so you can, because you can't, if anybody's ever walked over the Brooklyn Bridge, you can't just jump off the bridge. You've got to navigate all this architecture." So he was making some steps, crossing over different things, and he was getting, to within about 15 feet of the end, and he started to see the water underneath. And he said it was capping. It must have been pretty rough. And he said, "I saw these waves capping underneath me. And it kind of pulled me out of my zombie mode, because I saw in the caps, I saw pictures of each one of you kids." And so he took his foot, he took it off the rail, he backed up, and he walked 4 miles to the ferry. And the next day he went to work. I asked my dad, I had that opportunity, did he regret paying off those manufacturers? And he said no. He said, I owed extra $200. I owed this one $300,000. I owed this one $175,000. If I didn't pay them, each one of those families would have gone bankrupt. And each one of them would have lost their house. And they had kids. And he said, plus I really believed in myself. I knew that I wasn't going to become a millionaire again. He said it's hard to do. Through school and into adulthood. And that's exactly what he did. We survived, but we survived in poverty. Somehow my father was able to maintain and hold on to the house. The network of friends that he built up, were the rich relationships he built up, pulled us out of the abyss. I can't tell you how many times. How many times there were realtors literally walking around the perimeter of our house, showing people our house because we were in foreclosure. It happened a dozen times. And you grow up as a child, this becomes part of your personality. It becomes part of your belief system. And I can tell you, when I went into my study, which I'm going to talk about in a few seconds, my perception was money is bad, wealthy people are evil and greedy, and poor people are good and victims. That's what my mindset was going into this, because of how I was raised, in poverty. In wealth, it was a whole different upbringing. In poverty, we were raised where there was a scarcity mindset, and things were negative. There were always problems and to overcome. So that is probably the underlying psychological reason why I embarked on this study. The thing that really lit the fuse was a small business client that came into my office just when I had taken over my CPA firm in 2004. It was probably 3 months after I'd taken over the CPA firm. And he came in. This was a big guy. He ran an auto body shop that had passed down from his father to himself. He's been running it for about 15 years. And over those 15 years, he had every year lost money. So he was tapping his line of credit, and he accumulated somewhere close to $400,000 on his line of credit. And the bank termed his line of credit, meaning they shut the line off and they said, you got to now pay this off like a note. And he said, if I need you, Tom, to help me get a line of credit with the bank, or the 13 or 14 families that work for me, people that work for me, aren't going to be able to pay their mortgage or their rent this Friday. And it's impossible. I can't, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to, in a 3 days' time, get you a banker who's going to loan you, give you a line of credit. So it's just not going to happen. I said, it's unrealistic. He broke crying in front of me. And he just looked up at me. He had tears in his eyes. And he said, and he asked me a question, and it was, what is it that I'm doing wrong? What are your successful clients doing that I'm not doing? And I honestly, my CPA brain started going off. Oh, we all have patented responses for that. But none of them were the right answer. And I knew it. So I started doing research. I found a book called The Millionaire Next Door. It was interesting, had some good data in it. Dr. Thomas Stanley did a good job on that. But he only looked at one side of the equation. He only looked at, what, after the fact, when these people are starting to earn money, what do their lives look like? And what are their backgrounds that, behind the background, what their education is, what kind of cars do they own, what kind of houses do they own. But he never got into the other side of the equation. There's two sides to the coin. And the other side of the coin is, what are you doing wrong? I mean, it's great to know what you're doing right. And there are books, there's hundreds of books out there, maybe thousands of books that talk about success principles. I mean, Jack Canfield has a great book, Success Principles. Talks about everything that successful people do. But I thought to myself, there's got to be resource out there, some book out there that says, this is why you're poor. There wasn't. Now, I have never done a study before in my life. I'm very analytical. I'm very good at what I do with my taxes in the accounting world. Very analytical. I can take an Excel worksheet and wrap it around this room. I can link it to Jason, to Robin's worksheet. I can do anything with Excel. And I said, well, I'm going to do this study, and I'm going to use Excel as my tool. And that's exactly what I did. That was the easy part. The hard part was gathering the information. And I didn't realize it was going to take me so long. It took me 5 years to complete what I call the Rich Habits study. And what I did is I made a list of everybody I knew who was wealthy. And then I asked people who I knew, clients, their business partners, friends, family, everyone I knew. I asked them if they knew people who were wealthy, and they put me in touch with people, and then they put me in touch with people. So I had this list, and it wasn't like a list of, boom, I have 233 rich people. Now let me go. It was, I got a list of 50. Now I started my study. Then it was a list of another 50. Then I got 100. Then it was, and I kept going and going. My goal was to have 100 people, rich people in the study, and 100 poor people. But I have to tell you, I was so fascinated with the information that I was gathering that I couldn't stop. I went all the way to 233 wealthy people, 177 of which were self-made millionaires. The other 24% inherited their wealth. And then I had 128 poor people in the study. Now, the rich people, the criteria was $160,000 of gross income, which I know sounds not like a lot of money, and it's a two-part test, it's a conjunctive test, $3.2 million in net assets. That makes you wealthy. Where I got the $3.2 million is from my financial planning background. I can take anyone's $3.2 million and put it into a variable annuity, and it'll kick off $160,000 a year. So I thought that was a good number. It might not be 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. I know that from my experience in the financial planning. Poor people, the criteria I used was a total income, annual income of less than $35,000 and less than $5,000 in the bank. So if they met those two criteria, then I wanted to study them. I asked each individual in the study, and if you add them up, that's 361 individuals, 144 questions. And if you do the math, I'm good at math, 361 times 144 equals 51,984 questions. I don't know anybody who asked that many questions in a study. They probably have been studies that have asked that. I just don't know them. And that's why it took so long. It literally took 4 years just to gather the data, and then another 16 months analyzing the data. And that's where I really think my skill sets, like the Genome Project, you right? Now I'm getting to something that I see the passion flowing right immediately. Dr. Venter, he was able to blow past all of the projections on how long it would take to map out the genome, and he shortcutted it into 2 years or something like that. It was amazing. He used computer technology. Well, I kind of used the same technology to accelerate my analysis of the data. I created all these worksheets and I grouped them. Eventually, I came down to 333 grouping categories, if you will, and I had responses for all of that, and then I summarized it. And as I was summarizing it and analyzing it, the closer and closer I got to a summary, the more and more I realized, geez, these are habits we're talking about here. Little things that we do every single day. When I went into this, I never was looking at, I want to study habits. I was trying to answer two questions. Why are some people rich? And why are some people poor? And what do rich people and poor people do from the minute that they wake up in the morning to the minute that they put their head on the pillow? That's why I had so many questions. And then when I was done with what I call my research summary, I said, well, this is habits. All it is habits, little things we do every day. So I broke it down into rich column and a poor column, and then I started studying it. I'm still to this day studying it. There's so much information. And I created what I call the Rich Habits Training Program. My idea was I'm going to train everybody I can on the rich habits. So I created this program, and I started doing these learning sessions, 1 hour learning sessions in my conference room, which could fit about 15 people. I did what Dale Carnegie did. I took a page out of his book. He was the one that wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. Great book. He was doing this, he would put up a learning session or educational session, 1 hour, 2 hours, and $1, $2. He put it up on the YMCA. So I went to my local YMCA and I literally put up these flyers. And then I went to the bank, I do banking, my company's bank, and I put flyers in there. I put flyers everywhere. And I would get probably 10 to 12 people at a time in the room. I did about 10 of those. And over probably 6 months, I started getting some feedback from some of these people. A couple of insurance agents reached out to me and said, I just made an additional $150,000. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I did just what you told me on the goal setting. So I said, that's great. Another guy called me, said he made another $75,000, and some woman called me and said, oh, I just got a new job and I'm making twice as much money. I did just what you said on the networking, and so on. And then I started getting calls from other people who said, you have to write a book on this stuff. You got to let everybody know about these rich habits. And I said, I'm not going to write a book. I have no idea how to write a book. I know how to do a tax return. I could do a financial plan. I haven't a clue how to write a book. So what do I do when I don't know anything? I read 3 books. That's my rule. So I read 3 books. Collier's book on writing. I read some book that's, I think Stephen King wrote on how to write. And I read another book on all these authors, how their writing habits and what they do. And I said, this doesn't seem so hard. It certainly, in my mind, helped that I had to sit for a 22-hour CPA exam and study for 6 months. So I said, it's got to be easier than that. So I started writing my book. The first manuscript read like The Millionaire Next Door, because I had a lot of data, and I said, I'm going to put all this data in there, and had like 450 pages. And I sent it to a millionaire friend of mine, and he sent it back with a big X on it, and a copy of the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And he said, this is the book you need to write. College professor, he wrote on it. Because he said the manuscript was for college students and graduate students. So I was like, how the heck am I going to condense this into this? He told me you have to get it under 100 pages. But he was nice enough to send me that book, and I read through that book like 100 times. And it took like almost 100 times for the light bulb to go off in my head. This stuff, the way the brain works, the subconscious, the limbic system, and then the brainstem, they're taking in all of this information, and you don't really know it. And then suddenly, it communicates to your conscious part of your brain, your neocortex, and it says, hey, intuition, I got an idea, insight, inspiration. Well, it happened to me one night. I remember my son had just left for college. It was September, and it was, I think, 2009. And all of a sudden, I was waking up because I was getting information from God knows where. The first information I got was rich habits. And I said, what the hell is that? So I keep a notepad by my desk, and I wrote down rich habits. It looked like somebody in the middle of the night writing down rich habits, by the way. It was like this. And an hour later, I woke up again, and it was chapter 1. I'm not kidding you, went on all night. My wife kicked me out of the bedroom. She said, go into Brendan's room. You're waking me up. Every time you wake up and write in your stupid notebook, you're waking me up. So please, just go in the other room. It went on till 6 in the morning. I didn't get much sleep that night, but when I was done, I had the entire outline for what became rich habits. And that's not spiritual or anything like that. This is the subconscious mind. It's an amazing brain. Our brains are just simply amazing. This is something if you can see it, your circumstances don't define you, your habits do. I've run into this in the media. CNN lambasted me because I was on the Dave Ramsey show. And for some reason, I wrote Rich Habits to help poor people because I was poor and I wanted to help poor people. So that was my motivation. I didn't want to help rich people get richer. I could care less. I hated them, remember? So the interview with Dave Ramsey has a slant. He basically has the same belief that where I reached the same conclusion he has in his mind is the same conclusion I reached, which is we are responsible for the circumstances of our lives. But Dave does it in not so nice a way. So CNN ripped me apart, and they ripped Dave apart, and they said, basically, poor people are victims. They're victims of wealthy people. They're victims of government. They're victims of society, poor education system that went on and on and on. They're not at fault. Society's at fault. And that was the opposite of the conclusion that I reached in my study. I found that your circumstances are dictated by your habits, the little things that you do every day. Wealthy people are dreamers. There's two things I want to cover here. One is passion, and the other is growth. When you pursue something you're passionate about, it's like Hansel and Gretel, the breadcrumbs, right? So you're following your passion. Passion leads to your inner talents. Passion is the way the brain communicates to you, this is what you should be doing for life. And when you embark on something that you're passionate about, you're typically going to exploit some inner talent that you have. Your inner talent, when you engage in it, is how you reach your calling in life, or how you find your calling in life. So passion leads to inner talents, and inner talents, when you engage in them, lead to your calling in life. These 177 self-made millionaires in my study all were pursuing something they were passionate about. They were all dreamers. When I was in Toronto a couple years ago, I had this great opportunity to speak on the same stage as Richard Branson, Sir Richard. I had to follow him, just like I have to follow Robin. Anyway, the speakers were one of the benefits of being a speaker, besides getting paid, and they pay for everything, is you get to have tea with Richard. So we're in this room, 5 of us who were speaking, well, 3 of us who were speaking there that day, and Robin Sharma, who is the leader of the host of the event. And we're in this small room, and Richard's sitting there, and there's a bodyguard, armed bodyguard here, and there's an armed bodyguard here. And I'm like, I'm not going to ask him anything. These guys will shoot me. But I got up the courage, and I asked Richard Branson, I said, the media portrays you as a risk-taking workaholic. And I said, are you that? Is your life work? And he looked at me, and he smiled, and he's got this really great smile, like Hollywood good looks smile. It's disarming. And he smiled at me, and he said, he looked at my badge, my name tag, and he said, Tom, what if I told you that instead of working 12 to 14 hours a day, I played 12 to 14 hours a day? What would you think of me? I said, well, I would think you're just another rich, lazy person. And he said, that's the way I feel. I feel like I'm a rich, lazy person because every day I get to play. He goes, there isn't a day I go into the office where I can't wait to get there, or wherever he's going, Africa, in a balloon. The guy loves everything about his life, but he manufactured that because he's a dreamer. And I thought, wow, that's the key. You've got to find your calling in life. And the only way you find your calling in life is by pursuing your passions. And part of all of this is pursuing your dreams. Now, the problem with pursuing your dreams is that it takes you out of what I call your comfort circle, your comfort zone. When you start pursuing your dream, you're going to engage in certain activities, like I did with the book writing, that you never did before. It's very easy to stick with doing tax returns and financial plans. It's very difficult when you've never written a book before to figure out how to write, number one, and then how to put it together and call it a book. So I can tell you, it takes you completely out of your comfort zone. It makes you, I don't want to call it stress because that's the wrong terminology, but it creates an itch that just doesn't go away, and it bothers you. And so you keep itching, and you keep growing, and you keep learning, and you keep getting better, and eventually your circle, your comfort circle starts to expand, and it gets bigger. I mean, these people that are really successful in life, that are like Branson and Elon Musk, they have huge circles. There's so much they're comfortable with. The problem with people is that they have a little circle, and they refuse to step outside of it. Because every time, and you're really not stepping outside of it, what you're really doing is pushing that circle like a balloon. And every time you push it, it expands. But it's uncomfortable. Because why? You make mistakes. You make errors. You do things wrong. When you're pursuing a dream, and you make mistakes, and you make errors, and you do things wrong, it often costs money. It's painful. The lessons are painful. But the passion is what keeps you engaged in the dream. Passion is the key. And this is just some stats that I thought I got from my studies. He's pursuing a dream. 80% of the rich pursued a dream, 3% of the poor. This is the kind of stuff, this is what my research summary looks like. I want to get out of the way here. So I have these, this is really just a picture of one section of my research summary. And these are just the 80% of the rich were pursuing some type of dream. And they were focused on their goals. And you could see the disparity between the rich and the poor. And this just popped up over and over again in my research on different areas. Daily self-improvement. When I just recently read an article by a journalist who had the opportunity to talk to Oprah, Richard Branson, Warren Buffett, and Elon Musk. It was on success. That was the article was based on success, how people become successful. And so the journalist asked them, if you could boil down the most important number one trait that is responsible for your success, what would it be? All four of them, they weren't in the same room. You know, this is telephone stuff going on. They all four responded the same way. Daily self-improvement is the number one asset that got me to where I am today. What I found in my study, my research, was that wealthy people do certain things every single day that enable them to grow their knowledge and their skills. They read every day, 30 minutes or more. They study words. Words are the way we communicate. They're students of words. They vet the words that come out of their mouths. So the more words that they have, the better they can communicate. They explore novel things. The brain loves novelty. We're hardwired to seek out novel things. That's why we're inventors and we're discoverers. And that's why we love to read about the 1,248 new exoplanets that we found, or how we can alter the brain so that we can improve our memory. We love reading about novel things, and it's because our brains are hardwired that way. And wealthy people, in my study, they were all about. I had one wealthy person who he climbed not Mount Everest, but some huge mountain in Washington, Mount McKinley. He camped on Mount McKinley. I didn't even know you could do that. He took his boat, like with a regatta of other boats, and they went from New Jersey all the way down to the Bahamas. It's a long trip. He went hunting for shark. He calls it hunting for shark. He did all of these crazy things while at the same time making $1 million a year at his business. He put all of the pieces in place so that he had the ability to go out for a month and explore crystal caves. He did some exploration on crystal caves. He recently passed away 3 weeks ago. A very interesting guy, but he was one of the individuals in my study. Loved doing new things. And there's a percentage, I think it's 23% of the wealthy in my study wrote. They wrote for trade publications, they wrote for newspapers, they wrote for magazines, they wrote for their company newsletter. They did a lot of writing. The great thing about writing, as opposed to reading is good because it helps increase your knowledge base. Writing, because it engages the prefrontal cortex, is a portion of the motor cortex of the brain. So now you've engaged the motor cortex of the brain, plus you've engaged the hippocampus, which is where your memories are. And now you got the two of them engaged. So you don't have just one part of the brain, the hippocampus, and just trying to get that knowledge and stuffing it into your brain and eventually turning it into memory. You've got two parts of the brain. Abraham Lincoln never memorized a speech. He wrote it down 3 to 5 times. That's how he was able to seemingly speak as if he was talking impromptu. He would write it down 3 to 5 times and it would become memory. And I read as one of the many biographies on him. I've read several on him because he was interesting. But that was the thing that stuck out. I thought, wow, there's got to be some science behind that. And I found out that there is. There's plenty of science behind it. Exercising aerobically 20 to 30 minutes a day, that's part of the self-improvement. I'm going to get into that a little bit more because I have a lot of information on that. I'm sorry, I'm blocking you, aren't I? I can go back 50 feet. I just bought this last night. I can probably be like this. We have to edit that part. I still stink at this. So, rich thinking. What is rich thinking? Positive mental outlook. What is a positive mental outlook? It's optimistic thinking, enthusiasm, it's gratitude, it's abundance thinking. It's anything positive that you can think, or positive emotion. Now, why is that important? It's important because I want to cite 2 people who are really onto this stuff. Barbara Fredrickson is a psychology researcher for the University of North Carolina. She did a series of studies, but this study really caught my eye because she nailed it. And what she did is she took 2 groups. The one group was shown pictures of just negative, devastating things. World War II, Hitler, concentration camps, Katrina. You think of any bad thing that happened in the world, they were Barbara was showing them these pictures. The other group were shown pictures of the beach, playing with your kids, having a couple of margaritas, or Foster's Lager, my favorite beer, by the way. They had all these nice pictures. Then she gave the 2 groups the same questions to answer. And what was startling about her research was that the individuals who were shown the negative pictures had far fewer responses, far fewer answers. The individuals that were shown all the happy pictures, they kept going and going. They had answers upon answers. It was like a 5-to-1 ratio. And why is that important? It's important because she already knew going into the study, there was a lot of science on this, that negativity narrows your focus. It's part of the fight or flight process in the body. You ever see or read about those stories about people who have a car accident and then they say they were in shock, right? What does that actually mean? They're in shock. Well, we think, oh, they're unresponsive. What it is the prefrontal cortex completely shuts down. They go into fight or flight mode. The subconscious, the limbic system, and the brainstem take over. They take over and they turn off the prefrontal cortex. That's the part that makes us human, the prefrontal cortex. It's our thinking, it's our decision-making part of the brain. So these people are looking at whoever with vacant stares. They look like zombies because their whole consciousness is gone. The only thing that's working is their subconscious. And that's what negative thinking does. In a smaller, that's an exaggeration, but the car crash. But when you are under stress, when your boss yells at you for something, when your wife yells at you, that happens a lot to me, puts you under stress. People that put pressure on you. You have deadlines. You go into stress mode. Going into stress mode narrows your focus, and it can be a really good thing, especially when you're studying for the CPA exam or the med caps, right? All hell could be breaking loose around you. The house could be on fire, and you're just studying for those med caps. So it could be a really good thing. But while it can be a really good thing, it can also be a really bad thing, because when you narrow your focus, you don't see anything that's going on around you. So stress causes you to become negative, and the negativity narrows your focus. And because your focus is narrowed, you miss opportunities and solutions to problems that are all around you. You don't see them. They're invisible to you. Stress causes that to happen. Negative thinking causes that to happen. When you have a positive mental outlook, and that's why these self-made millionaires all had a positive mental outlook. Not all of them, but am I going the wrong way? They all believed that they were responsible for their lives. They all believed that they could succeed. They had this unbridled enthusiasm, this hopefulness, this belief system that said, I can do it. The poor people believed that there was no way they had the ability to become wealthy. They just had all these limiting beliefs, which I'll get into in a little bit. This was really interesting to me. It's multiple streams of income, or more than one stream of income. Most people have a job. Most people put one pole in one pond. When something happens like the 2008 recession, and the unemployment rate goes up to 15%, the real unemployment rate goes up to 26%, those people who are unemployed are the people that have one pole in one pond. The self-made millionaires in my study, 65% of them, I can't get this right, had 3 streams of income. Some had 4 streams, and some had 5 streams. When you have multiple streams of income, by the way, it's not easy to create these streams of income. It takes effort. It's almost like building blocks. You have to build one stream, and then you have to go and build the other stream. And by the way, you got to make sure that stream is still working, and then you got to go and build the 3rd stream. And by the way, those 2 have to still be working. And then you got the 4. I have one of the individuals in my study has had $80 million worth of real estate owned about 50 different properties, apartment buildings, dry cleaning buildings. They owned parking lots. They had all of these different streams of income coming in. Richard Branson has more than 400 streams of income. Warren Buffett has more than 120 streams of income. Mark Zuckerberg has more than 60 streams of income. And Sergey Brin, who's the Google guy, he has more than 90 streams of income. This is what self-made millionaires do. They don't put their pole in one pond. They put several poles in different ponds. And then they watch carefully over those poles. They have people that they put in place to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Because they have enough income coming in, they can afford to pay people to manage a lot of this stuff. Finding a mentor in life, I found in my research, is the fast track to success. You will become wealthy faster when you find a mentor. In my study, out of the 177 self-made millionaires, 24% had found a mentor in life. What's interesting about that stat, because there's 24%, that means there's 66% that 86%, I'm an accountant, I can't even. The most of them didn't find a mentor in life. And the ones that did find a mentor in life, the thing that I found most compelling was that when I asked them the question of what do they attribute their success to, the self-made millionaires in my study who had a mentor in life, 93% of them said they attribute their wealth to their mentor, the person that taught them everything they know, that taught them what to do, what not to do. My son, who works for Moody's, it's a big company, right? He's 26 years old. He was my Rich Habits guinea pig. When I was doing my research, I would tell him, you got to do this, and you got to do that. You got to network. And he did what I told him to do. He did everything I told him to do. And he is the #1 salesperson in the country at his level for Moody's. I'm bragging, but why not? He does this mentoring thing. He not only mentors kids, he's part of Big Brothers, he's giving back and he's mentoring kids, but he has a mentor at Moody's. This guy is amazing. And it wasn't an accident. Brendan had the person he was working for at Moody's when he first started. He remember him coming home after about 3 months. He said, Dad, I think my boss hates me. And I said, why do you say that, Brendan? He said, well, she's always fighting with me, and we're always fighting with each other. I said, well, why are you fighting with her? And he said, because I disagree with her. What am I supposed to do? You taught me to stand up for myself. And when I was right, to say I was right. And I said, yeah, you're right. I taught you that. So I said, look, this is what I want you to do. I want you to seek out other people at Moody's that are, supervisors. And I want you to take them out for a couple beers, go to the bars with them, ask them out to see basketball games or whatever. So he started doing that over a 6-month period. And one of the individuals he ran into, who became his boss, took a liking to Brendan. And he said, Brendan, I want to hire you, but your supervisor says you're horrible. He says, I know. She doesn't like me, but I'm not horrible. He said, I know. I got some feedback from other people. In Moody's, they force you to do presentations. This is the way they try and vet out, separate the wheat from the chaff. So they're looking for people that could be potential salespeople. And you see that when people are giving presentations, they just have this natural ability to communicate. And Brendan happened to be very good at doing presentations. Even though his boss fought him on the presentation, she didn't want him doing any presentations. But they were mandated, so she couldn't do anything about it. So he had to give about a dozen presentations in that first year in his career. And they said, boy, this kid really does a good job on the presentations. I think he's got something on the ball. So his future boss said to him, I'm gonna take a gamble on you. And so Brendan got hired within Moody's. He got transferred. And last year, he exceeded the budget that they had for him by 125%. They gave him a trip to Portugal because he was 1 out of 11 in the country to hit that number. And his boss made a ton of money. And he said to Brendan, I'm so glad I took a gamble on you. That's the power of mentors. Now, Brendan just got hired away from his boss. It was a friendly hire to a bigger area. And the guy that hired him was the guy that he met in Portugal, who they had a couple of drinks with and they got drunk. And they liked each other. And he hired him away. And now Brendan tells me he's going to make close to $600,000. He's 26 years old. $600,000 this year. Can you imagine that? At 26 years old, I think I was making 12. My point is, the reason is because he found a mentor. It accelerated his success. If he had stayed where he was, he probably would have left Moody's. Who wants to work for someone that you don't like, right? One of these days. All right? Here we go. This is something I've come to call the herd doctrine. We're all hardwired to herd. We're herding right now. We all herd. We herd in classrooms. Families a micro-herd. Herds provide safety. In the early evolutionary days of humanity, human beings learned that if they herded together, they could defend themselves against predators. So herding essentially guaranteed the survival of the human race. So our brains hardwired it into us over the millennium. Self-made millionaires, I found in my research, do not follow the herd. They separate themselves from the herd. What happens when you separate yourself from the herd? When you try and pursue a dream or something you're passionate about, you're going to be faced with criticism. People are going to give you all sorts of negative what-if scenarios. What if you go bankrupt? What if it fails? When Donald Trump was considering doing The Apprentice, his staff, the people around him, gave him all sorts of, they communicated with him through emails and meetings. And they said, this is a mistake. Don't do it. What if this? What if that? And Donald Trump, because he's a millionaire, he's got that millionaire mindset, he said, wait a minute. What if I succeed? What if it becomes a #1 show? What if everybody likes it? What if everybody loves me? And so he looked at it differently. And that's part of the negativity and the positivity. He decided he wasn't going to follow the herd. He went out on a limb. Millionaires create herds, big herds. Decamillionaires create bigger herds. And billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin from Google create huge herds. The more people you can draw into your herd, like Apple did with the what was it called? Not the iPhone, the one before that, the iPod. The iPod set them on fire. He drew so many people into Apple, that iPod. He literally created a herd. There were people, I still have an MP3 player. I refuse to use the iPod, whatever it is. But there's millions of people, they just love it. And billions of people love Facebook. It's just amazing. When you bring people into your herd, you become wealthy. It's just a formula that's never going to change. I figured it out. I'm hitting the wrong button. Oh, this is a topic. How much time do I have on this? I want to hit on some of this stuff because it's so important. Good health. There's really 9 things I want to cover on this. And I don't want to miss one. So exercise, I found in my research, increases your IQ. What it does is, there's a neuron. Every brain cell is called a neuron. It has a dendrite and an axon branch, and then the nucleus. That's the body of the neuron. Axons are like the cables, the cable, the internet cable. It's where a lot of the information starts. The dendrites are receiving this information from the axons. What they found, one of the individuals who was studying Einstein's brain, and they're not so sure the study's accurate, so I want to qualify that, but what this woman found when she sliced off part of Einstein's brain is that he had more axons than the average typical human being. And other studies are coming around to showing that the more axon branches you have, which means the more synapses you have, the greater your intelligence, the higher your IQ. The interesting thing about these self-made millionaires is that they all were fanatics of self-improvement. So they were all growing their axon branches, their axons and their brain cells. And they were also engaging in daily activity, exercise, aerobic exercise. They watched what they ate. Some of them lifted weights. The interesting thing about weightlifting is it increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's like what the neuroscientists and the scientists that study the brain like to call it miracle grow for the brain. So it helps grow the neurons, it helps grow the axons, it helps grow the myelin sheath that surrounds, it's like insulation around the axon. The thicker that sheath, the easier it is, or the better the transmission of electrical and chemical signals that take place on the axon. Exercise increases blood flow into an area of the brain called the dentate gyrus. This is an area of the brain that is associated with memory and neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the birth of new brain cells. Recent studies have shown that we actually create new brain cells every day, even into our 80s. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 new brain cells every day. They never knew that. They always thought that whatever number of cells we were born with, that was it, and then during life, mainly from drinking alcohol and other abuses of the brain, you would lose your neurons. So that turns out that's not true. We're constantly adding neurons every single day. A neuron, when we give birth to a neuron, it's like a stem cell, and it could go in 2 directions. It could be a neuron or a glial cell. Glial cells support the neurons. And so exercise increases the production of new brain cells. Not only neurons, but these glial cells that support the brain. Exercise reduces blood pressure. It controls your blood sugar. There's something called erythropoietin. This this is a chemical that helps increase the oxygen content in your red blood cells. The more oxygen that your red blood cells can carry, the more fuel for the body. And the more fuel for the body, the better your performance. I remember someone called Lance Armstrong. He got in trouble for blood doping. What he was doing was feeding his body, his blood, with new red blood cells, because that way he could have more oxygen to help him win all of those bicycle things that he did. I'm not a Lance Armstrong fan, so I have no idea. There's something called telomerase. I wish I had the woman's name. I have it. I just didn't write it on my card. But this scientist who got a 2009 a Nobel Prize studied the bristlecone pine tree. Bristlecone pine trees live the longest out of all trees, 4,800 years. She wanted to find out why. Why do they live so long? So she studied them and found out that they produce an abundance of an enzyme called telomerase. So she went back to her lab and she found out that human beings also produce a small amount of telomerase. Telomerase is important. It's an enzyme that protects and rebuilds the telomeres that are on the end of chromosomes. So if you think about a cell, inside the cell is the nucleus, and inside the nucleus is your DNA. The DNA is really these two sets of chromosomes kind of wrapped around each other, and they have genes. That's where our genes are, on the chromosomes. When those chromosomes, at the end of those chromosomes are these things called telomeres. They're like, the scientists like to refer to them as shoe caps on your shoelaces. And every time a cell divides and a new cell is created, the telomeres shrink. They're like fuses. Eventually, those telomeres shrink so much that the bomb goes off and the chromosome unravels and the cell dies. That's called aging. What this woman found, the scientist found, was that really the fountain of youth, I think. Eventually, one day, we're going to be able to live 300 years because of what she discovered. She's going to be able to rebuild, her science is going to be able to rebuild our chromosomes. One of the reasons why the wealthy people engaged in exercise almost on a regular basis was because at least they told me, the exercise gives them more energy, makes them feel healthier, they have fewer sick days. Fewer sick days translates into more productivity, more energy translates into more productivity. The people who are the most productive in society get paid the most. So your boss is going to reward you because you're productive. Your customers are going to reward you because you're productive. Your clients are going to reward you. You make more money when you're productive. So when you're healthy, you stay productive. It increases productivity. And I know this is called the law of association. The successful people in my study associated with other successful people. And there's an individual by the name of Nicholas Dacus. He's a Yale University professor. He's a leading researcher on socially contagious behavior. And what he found in all of his research is that we mirror the behaviors, the thinking, and the emotions of our social networks. The reason behind it is something called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons give us the ability to mimic behavior of others. These mirror neurons are why when your circle of friends are overweight, you're probably going to be overweight. It's the reason why Weight Watchers is so successful. And it's the reason why successful people associate with other successful people. It's the birds of the feather. There's just some data on this. One of the things I found is wealthy people, they try and avoid associating with toxic people. Toxic people drag you down, and they're disruptors. I got a call from a woman who I'm trying to exit out of my relationship contact database because she's toxic. She called me on a Sunday saying, I need $5,000 or they're going to take my car. That's what toxic relationships do. They put you under stress because now, they always have some emergency, some problem. Successful people associate with like-minded, successful people. And they don't associate with toxic people, or they try and minimize their association with toxic people. Feedback. The reason we don't seek feedback is fear of criticism. We're afraid of the negative criticism. Self-made millionaires are fanatics when it comes to feedback. They're always looking for feedback. That's the only way they can know if they're doing something right or they're doing something wrong. Robin Sharma calls this the 5 a.m. club. They wake up 3 hours earlier. 44% of the wealthy in my study woke up 3 hours earlier. And what they did with those 3 hours is things like reading. They were going to school at night. They were on nonprofits that they were running. Did 100 different things in the morning, and it was always something associated with growth and furthering their relationships and their skill sets. Self-made millionaires never give up. They go all in, and eventually, this is what happens with entrepreneurs. They face there's a fork in the road. The left road says, the sign says, go all in, and the right sign says, cut your losses. Self-made millionaires are self-made millionaires because to them, there really isn't a choice. There's no choice. They're going to go all in. They're going to get divorced. They're going to go bankrupt. Elon Musk said it best this week. He was interviewed, and they asked him, when you were failing, did you ever think of quitting? And he said, no. Quitting? He said, I'd have to be dead or disabled. That's how they think. Dream setting. Dream setting is a process. It's a two-step process. You create a script of your life. You go out 10, 15 years, 500 to 1,000 words. Inside that script are your dreams. You bullet point all of your dreams. You take one of those dreams, and that's when the goal setting process begins. You build your goals around each dream. Each dream might have 5, 6, 7, or 10 goals that you have to accomplish. A goal is only a goal when it has two things. One is physical activity, and two, 100% achievability. If you're pursuing a goal, you have to ask yourself two questions. And one of the questions is not only what action do I have to take, but can I perform that activity? Most people, where they get goal setting wrong is they pursue a goal that they cannot perform. They don't have the skills and the requisite knowledge, and that's why they fail on the goal setting. Procrastination, everybody procrastinates. I even found it in the self-made millionaires. However, they have some tools that they use, the to-do list, the daily 5. Do 5 things every day that move you forward on your goals. They have accountability partners, which I heard Robin talking about, very important. Accountability partners get you to the gym at 6 in the morning because of guilt. And also setting artificial deadlines. But more importantly, communicating those artificial deadlines. It's one thing to set an artificial deadline, but when I say to you, hey, I promise you I'm going to call you and I'm going to give you that tax return that I was supposed to work on. I know if I don't get that to you, you're going to call me. So when I create an artificial deadline and communicate it to someone, that I found in my research, that's what holds these self-made millionaires' feet to the fire. And they use all of these different tricks to help them succeed. Etiquette. I love that picture, but maybe I'll move on. You'll have to have good etiquette. I write about it, and I spend a lot of time on etiquette in Rich Kids, which is a mentoring book for kids. But you have to be able to know how to communicate. The parents have to teach their kids how to communicate. They have to teach their kids how to dress on certain occasions. They have to teach their kids how, well, I'm talking not kids, but you have to know how to introduce yourself. And you have to gather information on everybody you come in contact with, their birthdays, the spouse's name, where they went to school. Every time you meet somebody new that you want to build a relationship with, a success-minded individual, you want to gather, it's a reconnaissance mission. You want to gather as much information as you can. The only way you can do that is by asking them questions about themselves. The last thing I'll touch on is belief. We all have beliefs. Successful, wealthy people have certain beliefs that enable them to succeed in life. They believe that they can succeed. Poor people have limiting beliefs. They don't believe that they can succeed. These limiting beliefs, when you have them, they create habits. My dad yelled at me one time when I was 10 years old, and it was embarrassing, and I still remember it to this day. He called me an idiot. He said if my brain wasn't attached to my shoulders, that great dad that I was talking about earlier, if my brain wasn't attached to my shoulders, I'd leave it in the bathroom. And he was justifiably mad at me. But it stuck with me. And my grades plummeted because I thought I was stupid, because I idolized my father. And it wasn't until Miss Summers in the 6th grade, when I failed another test, and she came to me, she said, you know, you're really smart. I believe on the next exam, if you really wanted to, you could get the best grade in the class. I believe in you, Tom. And I remember going home on the bus that day, all I could think about was studying for that exam. I spent 3 days studying for the exam. I got a 99 on that test. And Miss Summers did one thing better. She brought me up to the front of the class, and she bragged about me in front of the whole class. I knew he was smart. I told him he was smart. She went on for 10 minutes. Then I sat down. I was floating. I went on to become a B+, A- student after that. I went on to get my CPA, my CFP, my master's degree in tax, and I have like 18 licenses, all because of Mrs. Summers. One person can change your entire belief system, good or bad. That's how important people are, and that's how important our belief system is. It can alter our habits. Well, that's my study, and I'm sticking to it.